let's start with the beginning. I said that you all are putting a lot of effort, organizational and financial, into these races, into Republican races. And I understand that you and your organization have these sort of pastor briefings, sort of get out the vote, all sorts of, you know, a toolkit. Can you tell me exactly what you're doing?
Well, you've covered a lot of territory here. I can tell you what we're doing is we're working with churches across America to bring them to an understanding of what's happening in our nation. And the quote that you alluded to earlier was actually in a sermon I preached from Ephesians chapter 6. And the rest of that was that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities. And the issue is not with people or with parties, but it's with the spiritual influences. And so there is concern about the direction of our country. There's concern about religious freedom, which continues to be a major issue for conservative voters. And one of the reasons they did back Trump in the general election is because he promised to defend religious freedom and the exercise thereof, and that's what he's done as president. And so what we've seen is more and more pastors and churches who really understood the threat in the last 8 years are remaining very supportive of this president and his policies.
Tony Perkins, I want to ask you whether you are at all troubled by what I alluded to, which is President Trump in his personal life, in what he's been saying in terms of refugees and others. I mean, you know, he uses quite harsh, edgy language, and he's had all these issues, Stormy Daniels and others. How, you know, people want to try to figure out how people of faith like yourself support that kind of individual. And I think I'm hearing you say that it does boil down to politics and the kind of politics you support. Let me just quote... No?
Yeah. No, that's a really good question. But it's more than that. Because the support for Donald Trump does not come in a vacuum. We go back to the 2016 presidential election. In the primary, most of us were not with Donald Trump. I was not a Donald Trump supporter. It's when it came down to where we had to make a real choice. It wasn't a theoretical choice. It was a real choice between Hillary Clinton, who pledged to continue the policies of Barack Obama, his policies were antithetical to most Christians in this country, especially his attack on religious freedom, such as Little Sisters of the Poor. And so they decided to take a chance on Donald Trump. Based on the promises that he made, based on the fact he wrapped himself in the Republican Party platform, and that he chose a running mate who we all knew that was very clear on these issues. And to the surprise of many, he's kept his promises and he has advanced those policies that he said he would do. So nothing's changed. Those behaviors were prior to the election. There may be differences and disagreements on some policy initiatives and some of his tweets that he puts out. But by and large, the evangelical community remains supportive of this president because he's kept his promises.
I mean, look, just to be fair, Hillary Clinton herself is a religious woman, and she would say that she supports religious freedom, and so too would President Obama. I understand your differences.
Well, but there are
really
issues like life, abortion.
Right, precisely. Precisely, and that's basically what it boils down to. So I just want to ask you this, if you still stand by this. In January, so a long time ago, you told Politico that as long as Trump doesn't disappoint evangelicals politically, they'll stick with him. Whenever the policy stops and his administration reverts to just personality, that's where I believe the president will be in trouble. So first, I guess you still believe that, but is there a line that you draw as a Christian?
Two things. There was two things I said in that statement that and I've said this repeatedly, our support for the president is not unconditional. Our support for him is if he keeps his promises, as he has. And this behavior that we hear so much about prior to his election that is alleged to engaged in, if that were to occur now, the support would not remain. But that's not happening now. It's stuff that happened in the past. Everybody knew that he had skeletons in his closet. That's why they weren't with him in the primary. But again, when it came down to choice between him and Hillary Clinton, evangelicals chose someone who had lined up with them on the policy issues, and he has kept those policies or those promises and is implementing those policies. So as long as that continues, and as long as he stays on the straight and narrow, so to speak, as president, the support will remain.
Tony Perkins, clearly his supporters, and by a huge margin, including in the evangelical community, his base, believes, for instance, in his current immigration policy or tactic or or pronouncements from the Oval Office, whether it's the separation of families, whether it's the essential hard line against refugees, slashing the numbers of refugees allowed to come into the United States. They believe in it. The evangelicals do.
No, I don't
believe
think that. I don't think that's fair. I don't
Why
think
not?
that's because I think first off, there's two issues here. The evangelical community, and more broadly, the Christian community. There is not uniformity in the thinking on immigration and those policies. Now, here's what there is agreement on, is that we're a nation and we need to be secure. And to the degree that these policies are to secure our nation, whether it's at the borders or whether it's the refugee resettlements, but when it comes to immigration, we are for legal immigration. And I think you're going to actually see, most likely after this election, you're going to see the parties come together and come up with a workable immigration policy. There are many in the Republican Party supported by evangelicals, and you've even seen the president's, I think, position softening on this issue of immigration. They want to solve the problem when it comes to those that are here in this country already. We know we have to deal with it and provide a way forward. I think that the primary issue that the president has got the support on is providing the security for this nation, whether that's at our border or, again, in the resettlement program.
Mr. Perkins, I hear you again, but I do have to ask you this. Even his own Republican leaders in Congress, we hear, are trying to persuade the president to stop doubling down on this caravan threat. He's sent 15,000, or he says he's going to send 15,000 troops to the borders. They're nowhere near the border. Most people do not believe there's going to be an invasion, and yet he keeps using that language, and he keeps using it, as he said himself, as a successful campaign issue, successful campaign rhetoric. So again, I'm very interested to hear what you're saying about a potential post-election immigration reform between both parties. But hold on a second, I haven't quite finished. I want to ask you how you pass what the vice president and others, the White House press spokesman, as you remember, used biblical language to defend the separation of parents and children at the border. This is basically what they said. They used a Bible verse to defend that separation policy. And then basically any American who commits a crime is going to be separated from his or her child, etc. What the Bible actually says is that, you know, Christianity is supposed to transcend barriers of race, class, wealth, nationality. Neither Jew nor Greek, neither bond nor free. There is neither male nor female, for ye are all one in Christ Jesus. So here am I parroting, you know, the Old Testament. But I guess what I'm trying to ask you is, could you defend that as a Christian?
Well, actually, what I did is I took a group of pastors to meet with the Attorney General and sat down, and that was the beginning of working through a policy that would keep families united and try to discourage. Now, we got to step back here. The reason many of these families were coming and these children were coming is because of lax enforcement of our immigration policy. And so by creating this really a magnet to bring people here, we were dividing the families. And so I think this, again, goes back to securing our border, making very clear that we're a nation, we have borders, we're going to enforce those immigration policies, but doing it in a humane and a family-friendly, if you will, way. And the administration responded to that.
Mr. Perkins, again, that assumes that there is a problem with a massive influx of immigrants. In fact, the opposite is true. Ever since President Obama, there's been more leaving than coming in. So it is a successful election issue. And that is, I'm trying to figure out, you know, where one draws the line in quote-unquote demonizing the other. Because you yourself have said, and I can quote you yourself back to yourself, you wrote, "This country must come together." We've seen a spate of hate crimes. And I guess I'm trying to ask you and sort of put you on the spot, because you are a faith leader, what do you advise the administration if indeed we're going to see some post-midterm rapprochement and reconciliation after the spate of hate crimes?
Well, look, if we're talking about immigration, I think the president's doing the right thing by securing our borders. Whether it is 7,000 or 70,000, I think it's important that we are a nation ruled by law. People can come here, they can come here legally. America is very generous. I just got back from the Middle East. I was in the UAE. And they're a nation of about 10 million. only 2 million are citizens. You can't become a citizen of that country. We have very generous laws here. You just have to do it by the rules, by law. And I think this president is enforcing the law as the American people elected him to do.
Yeah, I mean, again, everybody believes in security. There's not one single political party or individual who doesn't believe in security.
Well, this president, that's what he's doing.
Right. But it assumes that there is a problem of a massive influx,
which people are coming.
None of the facts support. That's the issue.
You don't know who is in this caravan. I mean, there are people that infiltrate that caravan that can come in that do not want to become a part of the American family. I'm actually thankful that people want to come to this country. They want to come here. That's what America is about. It's about bringing people here. They just have to do it legally so that we can make sure that they're here for the right reasons.
Yeah, I mean, nobody wants the law to be broken. But again, it's about language, isn't it, Mr. Perkins? You've got this caravan in which the president and others talk about felons infiltrating, exotics, code word for Middle Easterners, that these are invaders. I'm asking you whether these are the right words to use in a political context where we're already very divided, and you yourself, of course, for some kind of reconciliation amongst Americans, haven't you?
I think we're conflating some issues here. The president was speaking with the facts based upon even what the Honduran president said was that their intelligence uncovered within this caravan. The president was making issue of that. I do think that our conversation here in the United States as Americans, whether we're Republican, whether we're Democrat, whether we're independent, whether we're liberal or conservative, I do think that the rhetoric has reached a point that, you know, we're no longer having conversations. We're talking over, not even talking over, we're shouting over each other. And I do think that we have to find a way back to where we can disagree. We can disagree, but do so in a civil manner that respects one another as human beings.
I think those are very, very welcome words. Do you know, I just want to pick up from what you just said. You were in the UAE, where you were meeting with leaders there, I guess trying to get protection for Christians and other faiths, or your own faith in that part of the world. And then you moved on, or the team moved on to Saudi Arabia. And that obviously is really important and central at the moment, given what happened to one of our colleagues, Jamal Khashoggi, who was working here in the United States, living here in the United States, and working for an American organization.
Just to be very clear, I did not go to Saudi Arabia.
Right, I know, but the team did, didn't they?
Some of the others went on. The others went on. I did not.
Do you know what they might have said to?
I believe
they met with Prince Mohammed bin Salman.
They did, but I have not had any conversations with him. I chose not to go to Saudi Arabia. I don't feel like this was the right time. Yes, it was. I don't think it was the right time to go.
So that's interesting, actually, since you made that point. So what do you think? I mean, I know you're not a politician, but what do you think America's relationship should be in the post-Khashoggi
Well, I don't think we have all the facts. I'm troubled. I don't believe Turkey and everything they have to say. I don't believe Saudi Arabia and whatever and all that they have to say. And they've been a great abuser of human rights and of religious freedoms in that country. And they're a negative influence in that part of the world. Now, I know that the Crown Prince is supposed to be a reformer, but I'm gonna withhold judgment till I see all the facts. I'm just going to say I'm troubled by what I see at this point.
Indeed. I want to read something to you, which I think is really, really interesting, given these elections. So one of the evangelical leaders quoted over the weekend said, "The number one thing anybody can give, you know, the faithful, is the supreme Christ. But the second greatest thing we can give this generation is the Supreme Court." So talk to me a little bit about what you hope, if you get the votes that you intend and you want, will be the trajectory. And of course, again, in the framework of the Kavanaugh very, very divisive hearings and appointment.
Well, you just go back to the polling in the last election, the 2016 election, and the Supreme Court factored very high in terms of the motivating factors for evangelicals voting in the general election for Donald Trump. And here's why. You go back to the issue of whether it was prayer in schools, Bible in the schools, the Ten Commandments in the schools, abortion on demand in 1973, none of those issues were done by legislative bodies. Those were all done by the court. For the last 6 decades, we've essentially had an activist court that has taken on the role of legislators. And so now what you see happening, and this is why I think even the motivation in the wake of the Kavanaugh hearing will pour over into this election, is that people see now we're at the verge of having a court that's anchored to the Constitution, that will operate within that framework and not do policies that should be done by the Congress or by the people.
I want to end by just playing you a little bit of an interview that I conducted with another faith leader, a Christian faith leader, William Barber, who just received the MacArthur Genius Grant. And again, he was talking in the context of this very divisive political atmosphere in the United States, this sort of tribalism, and mindful of the fact that, according to the latest Washington Post ABC poll, 75% of white evangelicals in the U.S. describe the federal crackdown on undocumented immigrants as positive, compared to just 46% of Americans overall. I just want to play you this soundbite about what he believes it means to be a conservative.
First of all, to be a conservative is to hold on to the essence of. Well, the essence of the Bible, if you cut out all the scriptures in the Bible that talk about how you should treat the poor and the immigrant, the Bible would fall apart. So if you're anti the poor and anti-immigrants, you're not being conservative. You're not holding on to the essence of.
So how do you respond to your fellow faith leader?
Well, I'm not holding on to the essence of the Bible. I'm holding on to the principles of Scripture. And as a Christian in America, what we seek to do is to work out, knowing that we are in a secular government, but we can take those principles and argue for and shape policy just as everyone else in our country has the right to do. And I know that the Scripture does speak to the poor. It does speak to the immigrant. But it also speaks to the rule of law. And in fact, in almost every instance you read in the Old Testament about taking in the poor, the immigrant, the stranger, it is then that they have an obligation to operate by your customs and your laws. It's the assimilation, it's the rule of law. And that's where many on kind of the left side of the ledger in the faith community fail to see the rule of law and how the two go together.
Tony Perkins, thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Good to be with you.